Check, 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 check. All right, everybody, are we on? Hey, now I'm on. So we're just going to give it a few more minutes to let some more people just trickle in. We know that there were some probably dropping off, some kids, but we wanted to just buy a little bit more time. So we'll get started here in about 2 or 3 more minutes.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming and being here in person. For those of you who are joining us online, thanks for joining in as well. And then you may be getting this at a later date, watching it as you may have been traveling or something like that. But thanks for joining us in this time. Hey, let me first of all say this. This is not scripted or planned, but just Bob Evans, thanks for the Habakkuk series. Been good for my soul. I appreciate that. And I'm grateful for your faithfulness in the scriptures over the years. So thanks, brother. And then, why are we here? A couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I think it was, we decided to do a town hall. And for those of you that took place in it, remember it was in the ballet room over yonder. We did it every week, alternating the hours so that we could keep the numbers smaller and ask questions and this, that, and the other. And we had a great time. We found that to be a very productive time in which we could meet with folks. We said, let's do that again. So last year, during this time, we had a town hall that was set up, and it was designed to discuss all things community center oriented. So where are we with the community center? What was it doing, et cetera? We had made videos even to get prepped for that. But as you know, there was this tiny little pandemic that hit just a few local places, and we were affected by that. So in this shutdown, we punted on the town hall. So rather than coming back to the town hall right now on the community center, we've got we'll have another event set up for that to discuss the community center. But this one we said, in light of this last year, man, let's talk about communication. Now, why communication? Right before the pandemic, we said we have got to put a focus on communication. And so Josh and others, the staff we met, so we've got to get our arms around communication, because in every single organization I have ever read about or heard about or investigated, communication is a struggle for every organization, small or large. And Wildwood is no exception to that rule. And so we asked this past year, beginning in the fall, we said, Josh, we need to restructure your job. We have had him doing a lot of production, and it's been good. He's extremely gifted and talented in these arenas. But we said, could you give a laser focus, and could you become in a narrow sense, the communications director for our church. And that means you've got to get us moving in a healthy direction in there. So we said, in order for us to know how to get there, where are we currently? And so Josh was tasked saying, hey, let's do a communications audit. The more he and I talked, the more I realized I don't know much about this subject at all. And so Josh had some great ideas. He consulted with others. We had some other elders and deacons involved. And we said, this is the route for us to go, and embarked on this audit in which you thankfully took part and did. So tonight is about getting the results of that. Where are we? Where do we want to get to? And how do we plan on getting there? And so that's what tonight really is. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for filling out the information on the audit. So unbelievably helpful for us. And I'm excited about where we're headed. And you get to hear about that tonight and ask us some questions. So with that, Josh, I'm just going to kick it off to you. Now, as the night goes on, you're free to text in any questions. We've already had several that have come in. Excited about that. That number to text is 850.
It's up there on the screen too.
It's 613. That's much better. 613-0883. Text those in, and I will be getting those, and they eventually will get routed over here to Mark, and he'll be able to get them to us. So thanks.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, Josh King, the communications director here at Wildwood. So David McNeely, senior pastor, and Mark Webb, who's one of our elders. And so the whole point here is to show you what we've been kind of digging into as far as this audit goes. And so the officers, the elders, the deacons, the staff, they've received a presentation as well. And we got into some of the weeds more with them. So we're not going to get into all the weeds with the congregation. We didn't feel like we wanted your eyes to glaze over, 45 minutes in. So we focused this in on the things that were the most impactful to our entire church family. So the things that were the most relevant to you, that we felt you would care the most about hearing and seeing. And so hopefully your eyes don't glaze over by the end of this. I realize communications is not it's not the most fun thing to talk about. There's nothing particularly exciting about it, and yet it is so necessary. But one of the things that is important is to understand, what do we mean by communication? Because depending on your industry, depending on just your field, it can mean different things to different people. So for our purposes, communication means simply how information is shared. And so that may sound simplistic, but really that becomes really important, and you'll see that as we go along. And one of the things that that occurred to us is I will oftentimes refer to Wildwood as a church family. And sometimes I'm just so used to doing that and saying that it just rolls off the tongue and I don't give a whole lot of thought to it. But when you stop and think about it, we as a church, we really are a family. And you'll hear some other staff that will describe Wildwood as a faith family. And the thing about family is communication is key. You have to talk to one another. There have to be clear channels for communication. It has to be back and forth. It can't just be one way. And as important as that is in an individual family unit, it's that much more important in a church body. And so that's the way we're approaching this, is we really do look at Wildwood as a church family. And so with that in mind, with that context, communication, it means something deeper. It's more meaningful. And so we know that you feel that, even if you don't necessarily think of it in terms of communications, you feel it when it's not happening. And so, that's what a lot of the audit surfaced, was just those pain points when communication isn't happening the way you expect, or communication isn't happening at all. And so with that being said, most of us are looking for communication to look something like this. So when we talk about communication channels, imagine a stream of water, water being the information. It's flowing downstream to the people that need it, who need access to it. Now, unfortunately for us, oftentimes it feels like this. A dry riverbed where you feel like something should be there, and you keep coming back to it, and there's not water there. There's not information there. So we wanted to take a very specific look at that. And so through the years, we've had numerous times where people have expressed a concern, a frustration, a pain point when it comes to communication. And so we wanted this audit to take a comprehensive look at communication and dig down into what was the specific problem, or what were the problems, what were causing them, what were the roots, so that we can get back to a stream of information that's there when you need access to it. So with that being said, effective communication is something that's important. We don't want to just communicate for the sake of communicating, because sometimes that can be irresponsible if not done correctly. And so effective communication for us is simply the alignment of these three things: simplicity, clarity, and consistency. It's simple. You know what you're looking at. You know what it means. Clarity, you know what you're expected to do with that information. You know how to act on it. Consistency, it's there when you expect it to be there. You know where to go. You know when it's supposed to be there. So when those three things are brought into alignment, that's when people feel healthy communication. That's when they feel that it's being effective, both as information sharers and information receivers. So that's the target we're after. When we talk about communication, this is what we're trying to implement. So now we get into the audit. And so I called this a communications culture audit. Culture is something that we all participate in. It's something that a number of people influence over the course of time. And so leaders, members, we all participate in that culture. And so the audit took a look at that culture. And so we started with leaders. And so I've got 1, 1, 1. That should be 1, 2, 3. I'm good with words, not really with numbers. So leaders, we started with staff, elders, and deacons, and just sent several rounds of surveys. It started out being closed-ended questions, and then it became open-ended questions. And that provided us with a really good baseline of at least how our leadership felt about communication, because, as you can imagine, not everybody felt the same way. There were a lot of our leaders who were experiencing some of those same frustrations and tensions. But then we followed that up with conversations. So it wasn't just surveys. We had some one-on-one conversations with leaders, the same ones, staff, elders, and deacons, but also with members of our community groups and leaders of our community groups, of our volunteers, just to get a better sense of how people felt about communication. And then the last step was a member survey, and we had nearly 300 people respond, which in terms of surveys is actually a very good response rate. And so the fact that we had 300 church members respond and participate in that survey was a win for me. I wasn't expecting that many people. So when they were coming in, one, I knew people felt strongly about it. And then two, it was just really helpful to get a broader understanding of just how different people in different aspects of our ministry, different demographics, how did they feel about the way we were or weren't communicating. So now we'll dig into a few things just right off the top. One of the questions that was asked was primary source. What's your primary source of getting information here at Wildwood Church? So 58% said email. That came as no surprise to us. Announcements, 19%. And then the website, 10%, and then everything else, community groups, social media, kind of trickled down from there. But then we followed that up by asking what was the most convenient, but not the one most convenient. We actually asked you to pick two. If you could pick any two, what would be the most convenient to you? And email shot up even further, 84%. Text all of a sudden shot up to the top, 44%, and then announcements, 36%. So one of the practical takeaways for us, just based on that information, is, hey, if texts are that much more convenient, we should be sending more of them. Now, not so much that you become annoyed with us, but we know we want to leverage that channel a little bit more in the future in order to communicate with you, our church family. And so then we move into some open-ended, some questions where we ask you to rate your response. And so these may have seemed a little strange. They weren't specific to communications, but they were very helpful, and I'll show you why in a minute. But first one was, overall, I'm satisfied with Wildwood Church, asking you to respond on a scale of 1 to 5, and so you can kind of see the results there. So generally positive, that's a good thing. But then how likely are you to recommend Wildwood to a friend or family member? And so you can see the ratings there. So the reason we asked that is because then we asked a question following those two questions. And it was simply, can you explain, or do you mind sharing why? What were some of the reasons for that score. And we took that information, those open-ended comments and feedback, and we used a software that basically analyzes all the words, all the text, and extracts some themes, some consistencies, some tone, just to get a better sense of, hey, what is consistent? How do people generally feel? Can we see some threads weaving together all this feedback? And so what we did is then we took a look at the themes that were most impacting that likely to recommend score. So on a positive side, we had things related to being Christ-centered, biblically based. People generally felt very positive about that. People felt very positive about the people, the community at Wildwood, which is great. People felt good about the kids ministry. And so we've heard through the years just a lot of, really good feedback. So that was, really helpful. But what's even more helpful is, hey, where is the negative feedback coming from? What are the problem areas that we need to devote some attention to? So no surprise, communications, I've highlighted it. It was definitely towards the top. A lot of that was related to just communications, both before the pandemic, but certainly during the pandemic. So mask was part of that, but also just connection with leadership. So that's our pastors, that's our session, that's our deacons. So there were a lot of comments that had to do with just connection to our leadership. So those were the most impactful themes. And now what we did is we took those themes, we took all the feedback from our members, from our staff, from our elders, from our deacons, and we looked at it all together. And then we started to see some very clear patterns, some clear categories emerge. And so we broke those out into 6, we'll call them buckets. These were problem areas. And here's what we discovered. Here's what we call them: channels. This is the one that the most people had the most to say. And this is just sources and outlets for information. So where do you go? How do you get it? Is it there? So channels for information. Leadership, so the visibility and the sense of connection with leaders. Decisions, not so much what a decision was, but how that decision was communicated. So notifying the right people the right way. There was a lot of pain points in that area. Follow-up. Reviewing what we did and said we would do. So kind of reporting back to our congregation, following up on those things. Meetings, this one had more to do with staff and with our officers, just making the best use of our time, communicating before, during, and after our meetings. And then planning, this one had some impact on our congregation, scheduling and communicating opportunities. So those are the 6 broad categories. But as we looked closer at those categories, we saw 2 root issues emerge. And once we were aware of those 2 root issues beneath the surface, we couldn't unsee them. We couldn't ignore them. And so those 2 issues are trust and accountability. And actually, we saw that you could actually divide those 6 categories, pretty evenly between those 2. And the interesting thing is they feed off of each other. They contribute to each other. And so what we saw was just some dysfunction when it came to overall trust in the channels for information, in the way decisions were being made and communicated. And then just when you're not able to know who the leadership, when you don't see them, when that visibility isn't there, you don't feel connected. And so it impacts trust. The lack of follow-up, the way meetings are handled, just the way we plan and then communicate opportunities. We saw a breakdown in accountability. So we wanted to bring that to your attention as well, because those are things that, became very obvious to us. And again, those are deeper root issues that we know have to be addressed for the overall health of our church family. So I'm going to dig in a little bit. I'm going to try to breeze through these, because what we really want to do is save a bulk of time at the end to address your specific questions. So I'm giving you a bird's eye view. If I move too quickly, you have some follow-up questions afterwards, please, come find me. I'd love to answer those. But kind of tackling channels. Again, this was the most popular category in terms of feedback. These are pain points. No consistent channels for feedback. When it comes to expressing questions, concerns, where do you go to? Who do you go to express those things, to make sure that gets back to leadership? The website not being as user-friendly or informative as it should be. No print channel to work alongside our digital channels. And then one that came up was just a lack of financial information or lack of financial updates, especially to our members who, are stakeholders in the life of the church, who give to the mission of Wildwood Church, being a little bit more consistent when it comes to giving you those financial updates, but also updates on the community center as well. Just kind of, again, following up with you, letting you know what's happening, what's available, where are we at, what's coming next. So as far as channels for information, that's where we saw some frustration just with that information not being clearly, simply available or consistently available. So then we jump over to leadership. And so what I described was an invisibility of elders and deacons, especially the session, not being familiar with who they were. And even one of the things that came up that we noticed is sort of a lack of awareness of the fact that we are a Presbyterian church. I won't ask for hands to be raised if you knew that. We don't necessarily wear that on our sleeve, but we are a Presbyterian church. But there was sort of a lack of awareness of that and how a Presbyterian church operates. What are the roles of the leaders, the responsibilities for the leaders? What's the difference between elders, deacons, and staff and pastors? And so that's something that sort of contributed to this pain point. People feeling disconnected because they didn't necessarily see or recognize the leaders. So there were, just some concerns about, do they know me? If I don't know who they are, do they know me? And, how do they care about me? Do they care? And then that's not to take away from the desire on the part of the elders and deacons to be more visible. That was one of their pain points, is they would like to be more visible. So this is an area that we knew we needed to focus on. Jumping from there to decisions. At times, leaders and members felt blindsided by decisions. And so again, not even so much the decision, but how that decision was communicated. And there were times where people that were directly impacted by the decision, they didn't necessarily find out when they needed to. They didn't find out first. They found out later through another channel. So we know that that's a breakdown in communicating our decisions. And then that contributes to a perceived lack of transparency, feeling like things are often need to know, that it's being hidden, spinning information. So you can see how all of this, starts to, it gets a little tangled up. All of these things sort of feed on the other things. So follow-up, not enough recaps of major events. There were several comments that sort of put it this way: we don't really celebrate enough of what's happening. So after we've publicized something, what happened? How many people came? Do we have pictures? Do we have some things that we could show? So kind of a lack of follow-up when it comes to just celebrating and reporting back on those things. But then other things that we say, hey, we're going to do this. This is coming up. Expect this. But then you never see anything. And even if we're aware of it behind the scenes, we've not done a great job of communicating it to the rest of our church family. And so it seems like nothing ever happens. And then again, no updates on Northside Community Center. That would be one example of that. And so I'm kind of jumping over meetings because, again, that had more to do with staff and with officers, and I will not bore you with the details of staff and officer meetings. I love you too much. And so we'll jump over to planning. And so the biggest one here was simply that because events and opportunities aren't planned well enough in advance, we don't communicate with you well enough in advance. So sometimes you find out about things that you'd love to be involved in, but it's way too late in the game. It's way too short notice. And so that was very clearly a pain point. And we know in order to communicate them further in advance, they need to be planned better and planned further in advance. And then also tied into this was just expectations of volunteers, expectations of our teams, not always being very clearly communicated in the planning process. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, that was a really big picture of a lot of the feedback. And for some of you, you may be thinking, "This first I've heard of a lot of this. Man, it's a lot of problems. It's a lot of some things that need to be addressed." And so, it's one thing to identify those things, but it's another thing to do something about them. So what comes next? Kind of taking a step back to breathe and say, how do we get better? If this is where we're at, how do we move on from here? And so I do have some encouraging news. I have some some early momentum to share with you. One of the ways that we knew we had to move towards progress was giving everyone a sense of ownership in the solution. We're all feeling the pain points to one degree or another, and we all have a stake in that. And so one of the ideas to come out of this was say, hey, let's actually assign task forces, teams that are dedicated to each of these categories, who can take a close look, who can brainstorm, try some things out, and then bring them back to us, some solutions that will move the needle in the right direction and introduce health in each of these specific categories. So to represent that ownership, we have an elder, a deacon, a staff member, and then just a lay member of our church, kind of representing all layers of our church family, having a stake in the solution there. And so one of those teams that I'll get to in a moment has already implemented some solutions, and so I'll share that with you, but also want to say, elders now, you'll notice the past several Sundays, one of our elders has been doing the call to worship. That elder has been, also praying in our worship service. And that's intentional. That's an effort to make our session, make our elders more visible to you, our church family, so you can know who they are and recognize them. And then, too, on the back end, our staff, we're implementing better systems in order to plan and publicize those opportunities much further in advance, so we're not catching you off guard, that we're not catching you short notice. So that's going to be happening very soon. And so I've been really encouraged to see some of the progress on that front. I hope you'll be encouraged. I mentioned one of the categories, and that's channels. Again, it was the one that people had the most to say about. And so we said, hey, this is the one that people are going to see and feel. It's going to be the most obvious. And so we want to go ahead and implement some things right away so people can begin to feel the momentum moving in the right direction. They can begin to see and experience some new, better ways to communicate and keep our church family in the loop. So this was the biggest felt need. Now, one of the first things right out of the gate, after talking with a number of you and having some really awesome conversations just about the meaningfulness of a printed channel is what I'll call it, just to work alongside our digital channels. And so beginning next Sunday, July 4th, we are bringing back what we're calling the Printed Weekly. And so that's going to be, I know some of you look really happy right now, but the idea there is we know every church is having to figure out how do we move on past COVID, knowing that people value the in-person, but also the virtual, the live stream. Those two things have to work together, but also the print and the digital, they have to work together. We can't just choose one and ignore the other. And so that was one of the priorities for us, is by bringing back a print bulletin or a printed weekly, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't replacing anything or working, against another channel. One of the things we knew we wanted to do is bring all of our channels into alignment. So there was a specific reason for each one of them. And so I think you're going to be encouraged when you see that this coming Sunday. And so a number of you mentioned the care list. And so there's going to be a version of the care list on there that's also, so every week you're going to have the latest names, the changes to the care list, but we're also going to direct you where to find that extensive care list. So to be able to continue finding the people that are in long-term care or who are in our military. So that's coming, but something else that's coming is what we've called the hub. And this is both digital and physical. So digitally, it's going to be a go-to, easy-to-find page on our website with the latest information, the latest opportunities, the things that we're talking about. This is the spot to go to in order to get the information, to act on it, to register. But we're also going to include links there. So if you're looking for a group, if you're looking to give, you'll be able to find all of these things on this hub page on our website. So that will make it more user-friendly, more easy to access, more informative. But also, we'll have a physical space out in the lobby. So that will also be the hub. So on Sunday morning, you've got a space that you can drop by in order to sign up for something or to ask a question, to find out information. And then, again, during the middle of the week, you can go to our website. So both of those things, that's an example of how we want the physical and the tangible to work alongside the digital, just as a way to, we want our communications to be comprehensive. Some people are going to value the digital more than the physical. Other people are going to be, the opposite. So we want to make sure that we're covering the board to keep as many people as possible in the loop and communicating well. And so as part of the hub, the Northside Community Center will have a permanent spot there. So from week to week, you may see new opportunities. You'll see some pictures just as far as what's happening out there. There's a lot happening out there, but we have to do a better job of following up and showing you and giving you a look and an idea of what's available as far as opportunities to get involved. So that's a look at channels and just some of the things to come out of the channels task force. What we hope to happen is for the other 5 areas, the 5 task forces, they're going to get to work and start brainstorming solutions that will introduce health and better communications in those 5 areas. So this one was designed to be sort of a flagship to get the ball rolling, and it has. And we hope that that it's an encouragement that you see that as progress being made to communicate better here at Wildwood Church. Some other reasons to celebrate, despite the frustrations, despite some of the dysfunction, God is still doing some really awesome things at Wildwood Church, and these come out in the stories of individual people. So we want you to hear and experience the stories of the people whose lives have been impacted in really amazing, really God-honoring and ways that only God could do in the midst of a pandemic. And so that's what our Vision Celebration is about, coming up on August the 22nd. That's a Sunday night event, so that'll be worship, that'll be storytelling, all around just a celebration of, in spite of all the things that might frustrate us, man, God can still work and still does work to bring about just positive things for his kingdom. And there's a lot of that happening here at Wildwood Church. So don't let any of this be a discouragement. We hope that it's an encouragement to you. But we also want to share that evening just the opportunities that exist and the opportunities that are coming for you to jump in, to get involved, and to begin living out our mission as a church family, as we do a much better job of communicating those with you. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully we didn't jump through that too fast, and I hope it was helpful and encouraging. But at this point, I'm going to pivot it back to Mark just to lead us through the rest of the evening.
Yeah, 2 things you mentioned earlier, trust and accountability. So I want to circle back to that and just have a little discussion amongst us about those issues. And audit, communications audit, that word is right up next to root canal for me. So I can't wait till we get to the Vision Celebration. That's going to be a little bit more fun to celebrate something than to audit something. But trust and accountability are really important. And I think when we have a gap of information of what we know and what we expect to know, you're going to fill in that gap with a couple different things. And that's either going to be trust or suspicion sometimes, especially in the midst of a pandemic. And so things felt a little bit heavy that's the understatement of the year, the worst pandemic in 100 years, and we were trying to self-audit ourselves on how we're doing communications. Now, I've been at Wildwood for a little over 20 years. I think I've heard we don't do communications well for every year for the past 20 years, but especially so, as we are worshiping corporately and we're not able to do so, it's going to exacerbate and reveal some of those problems that were already there. We had a recession. We had people concerned for the health and safety of their family, of themselves, of extended family members. And so when you've got all those things wrapped up into a ball, it's hard to pull those things out and say, these are pain points just for communication, or maybe I'm feeling already amped up or overly negative about something, and I'm filling this gap of information with suspicion. So that heaviness and hardness seems to be alleviating. I've noticed that in the past couple of weeks during worship. Just to be able to come in and worship, it's feeling different to me. I hope everybody's feeling the same thing too. Now, we haven't always made the right calls as a leadership team, as a session, and as a diaconate, as a staff. Some decisions came up so quickly, we only had a few days, speaking specifically to financial things like the PPP program. Some things had to be made at a staff level. Some things can't wait for a volunteer-led group of leaders to meet next month. Some things have to be made quickly in real time. And so trying to communicate those things when people aren't here just added to that heaviness. And so we do want to do better. We want to commit to do better. And some of the things that Josh just was talking about on the two root words that caught my attention, trust and accountability. Maybe, David, I'll throw this one to you. How can we do better on that issue of accountability, not just accountability from staff and leaders, but accountability from the congregation as well?
Good. One of the things that we talked about early on, Josh and I did, was when we talk about a communications culture, we mean just that very thing. I like the picture. That's the first time I saw that, the stream that is moving down. Communication is never a one-way street. So in your marriage, for example, or any friendship that you have, it could be a parent-child relationship. If there's only one person who is always and only doing the talking, that's not a relationship. You can't build a relationship on that. And so what we're saying is we do want to figure out how do we invite better two-way communication on this. And so the culture means this. So this early on to Josh. Josh is not going to fix the problem. He is not going to be the savior of communication. That is when you take a part and you take a part and you take a part and I take a part and he takes a part and they take a part. And when we all take a portion of this, then we're going to develop a much better culture. But it's going to come about when we all take initiative, being that rather than just solely waiting on something to happen for me. And I hope that makes sense and even comes across in the right way. So your question is this: how do we ensure accountability in there? I hope you know this. Wildwood has had the desire to be an effective communicating church for a long time, but desire is never enough. It's in there. You also have to make a commitment upon that desire that you have in order to make something come about. But guess what? The commitment is still not enough, because you can be committed to the wrong things and you're committed and you have a desire, but you're still doing the wrong things. And so it's not going to bring about the right results. So then you got to have a plan, and the plan has to be a good plan rather than a bad plan. But this is the last thing right here. And I think this is fair to say, where most organizations, this is certainly true of me as an individual. What are the systems that get put in place that allow us to continue to foster that desire, to continue with the commitment, and then to have workable plans? What's the system that enables us to do this over and over and over and over again, to replicate? That is what we have lacked at Wildwood for a long time. The problem pre-existed me coming in, and then let me just be frank, I probably made it worse. And one of the reasons that I probably made it worse is I am one of those rare human beings that needs about this much information. I just don't feel like I need a whole lot in order to, I just basically trust everyone. You say you do it, I just trust you. Okay, then you'll do it. We are developing systems right now through these task forces that do not require a single individual to do everything. It becomes a part of the culture that we have. So this accountability is through these systems that can be easily overseen and looked at with the officers of the church. But this is more important. It's not just the officers. It's systems that you will be aware of, that you will know about, and you can ask about. So there's a collective now accountability that we have. It doesn't remove the fact that we may have a couple of key people that need to keep their eye on the ball in this, but it's systems that we have to develop in order to get a culture of effective communication rather than just a one-way street. I hope that answered the.
It does. Communication, which I learned in school, there's 3 different places. You've got the sender of the message, you've got the message itself, and you've got the receiver. And when there's a breakdown in communication, it could be one of those couple different things. So it could be the receiver is not receiving it in the same way it was intended. It could be the means or the channels of communication. And it makes me think about John F. Kennedy's famous speech, not the jelly donut one, but the ask not what you can do for your country, but what, I got that reversed. Good communication. Ask not what your country can do for you. I apply that to Wildwood. What can you do? So if you are you feeling that gap in communication, pick up the phone, reach out, send an email to info@Wildwood. What was the last part? WildwoodPCA.com?
Info@wildwoodtlh.com.
Wildwood TLH, sorry. So do something proactive. You know, that series we did on James taught me a little bit about being proactive and taking some action and not just holding back and resting just on faith, but taking some action. That's usually the antidote to filling in those gaps with trust or suspicion. Talking about systems, that's a really good segue to what does happen next. Josh has done a great job rolling out this communications plan, and Josh is leaving. Josh is moving to Atlanta. So what's going to happen to this plan without Josh? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So it's here you go, good luck, and then no. So obviously my transition, it's been something that I'd been discussing, praying about. My wife and I just exploring the possibility when I was first approached about it. So that's been going on for a few months, but I knew at the same time that we were in the middle of this communications audit, and that was something that I communicated early on to Perimeter was, hey, this is a really important project for me. I want to see this through because if I'm going to be stepping out, I want to make sure that I'm laying down some tracks that are going to move the staff, the session, the church at large, everybody involved at Wildwood in a better direction when it comes to communication. So a lot of the feedback that we got early on in the process, just through conversations with leaders, with the feedback from our members, I knew that there were some very clear themes that we needed to go after. And so part of my job was really to figure out, okay, coming out of this audit, how do we move forward? How do we set up the staff to move in on these areas? How do we set up the members of Wildwood to know what's going on and to know how they can get involved in the solution? So that again is the beauty of the task force idea to me, not only because of what it represents, but it gives the deacons, all of the deacons have a voice in the process. The elders have a voice in the process. The staff, the members, men and women have a voice in the process. And so to me, that also reiterates that communication. It really isn't about having the right guy, in the right position at Wildwood. So it could be me, it could be somebody else, but the communications culture doesn't hinge on any one person. Now that person is responsible for trying to oversee and keep accountability when it comes to using the channels the correct way and making sure that information's flowing downstream where it needs to go. So I think that's been part of my priority too, is just working with our staff to make sure that there's that accountability is going to be there. And in terms of the task forces, there's a team, Mark's on it, David's on it, that also sort of oversees the task forces. So kind of a task force over the task forces. So to me, I feel encouraged stepping away. I want you to know that I would not want to step away if there was something left to be done. If I felt like I were stepping away and just sort of handing off this huge problem, for other people to fix. For me, I felt very invested and very responsible for at least doing what I could within my role while I'm here to lay down those tracks. And I've seen those tracks start to go down. I've worked with a number of our staff just to bring them up to speed, and I see some positive momentum. And I'm hopeful that in the weeks and months to come, you're going to see that momentum start to create a lot more positive things that you can experience and see for yourself.
Awesome. Thank you. And let's give Josh a hand. I think the work he's done here is awesome. Let's move into Q&A. And for those people that are watching online, I can get your questions here, so don't forget to text your questions to 0883. The local congregation here in the room is a bit rowdy, so we'll take some questions here if we can maintain order, but otherwise I'll read off the questions that have been texted in. So let's hit a couple questions if we're okay. Ready? Any final points, David or Josh, before we get to Q&A?
No, I would just say, even going back to those root issues, I think as, accountability happens, you start to see more trust rebuilt. And so, again, those two things feed off of each other. So as better systems of accountability occur, you give more reason for trust. As more trust happens, there's more accountability. So it's just, you got to start moving in and start building, rebuilding, cultivating, that accountability. So all the things that David discussed, I think those are going to be very impactful on the trust side as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think David's first sermon series here, when he got to Tallahassee, was on building a culture of prayer. And I think it's you have to start there. That's rooted and foundational. And I think a culture of communication is something that every church, regardless of size, needs. And so if it's something that we automatically think, we give the benefit of the doubt. When we don't know something, we'll reach out, we'll seek to find those answers. And hopefully we won't encounter another year like 2020, which really exacerbated a lot of these things. So let me jump to one of the first questions we got. And the question, this was a text question, asking about the move towards closer communication from the elders and their assigned family units. And I'll take that one. So that's under the section that Bob Evans is overseeing, Caring Deeply. And I think not always, the congregation should not always be expecting that elder. They should be expecting that elder to reach out to them proactively, but also don't wait for that to happen before you engage in communication. Please reach out to that elder. If you don't know which elder is assigned to you or your family, you can send an email to info@wildwoodtlh.com, or you can pick up the phone, call Renee. You can call any elder or deacon you do know, even if it's not necessarily the one that's assigned to your family. And you can get that information on where can I reach out. And I saw this work out really well last year. There was a family member that was injured and in a hospital, and they called me. I was able to get that information to the church. We were able to put them on the prayer and the care list, pray for them, follow up with them, ask what updates there are. And so building up that comfort level with that church officer that you're assigned to, so you don't wait to reach out. Now, we have other ways of reaching out too, through small groups and things like that, but it can't all go through staff. It's too much. And so that would be the primary thing to remember. I would say the big takeaway is don't always wait for incoming communication. You could always push that communication up the stream as well through that channel. Before I go to the next one, does anybody here have a question as it pertains to communication? And should we get a microphone? How should we best do that? Okay. Okay, let's do that. Dick?
I can talk loud. I had heard a lot about the shepherding program, and I didn't see much in the bulletins or anything about it. And it was I doubt that everybody in here knows who's supposed to be shepherding them. And that, when you're talking about communication, it comes from the bottom up, and that's where it comes from, the community. I also wonder how many elders are here tonight for our meeting. The ruling guys are going to make all these rules. Are all the elders here, or have they been invited, or where are they?
Yeah, it's a good question. The elders went through this communications. Should I repeat the question?
Yeah, it would be helpful, I think.
So the question, if I phrase this properly, is more on that same topic, on the shepherding groups that the elders are proactively reaching out to each member of the congregation. As it stands now, not every single member is covered by an individual elder. And that's something we're working through to get that done. And that, yes. And so that's where we need to hear feedback like that. Not, hey, I don't know what's going on, therefore it must not be working, but don't forget about me. Can I be assigned an elder? Can I reach out to I already know an elder that I'm comfortable talking to, or maybe it's a deacon that you would prefer to say, hey, that's who I want praying for me, that interested in my family and what's going on. So that's where we need some proactive, bottom-up from the congregation feedback and say, let's just fill in the details here. A lot of elders have already received this communication presentation by Josh, and so all the elders have heard this. The extended version. I think he had 70 slides. He had cut it down to 30, and then tonight he went to 20.
Yeah, you guys had 20 slides.
Just for time.
Yeah.
But this is something that we've been talking about for months and months and months. And that's something that's not always visible. We talked about the invisibility. Where are they? What are they doing? As a person who's been in these meetings, I can tell you there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of hours spent on this particular issue in addition to all the other things that have happened in the past year. You don't always see them on Sunday morning, but I can attest that they're happening early at the crack of dawn and late into the evening. And that's something that not everybody gets to see. And so you could fill in, maybe they're doing nothing, or you could fill in, I trust that we have people that we've elected that have been ordained to carry out this role of leadership. But it's always good to hear, so thank you.
Yeah, and I think too, that sort of is a good example of when we talk about follow-up. So you may hear something, publicly talked about and then see very little or hear very little after the fact. And that's really a great example of that category. Just even if a lot of that stuff is happening, we, as leaders know that we need to take that upon ourselves to make that a little bit more front and center to the extent that it's appropriate, just to know, just to repeat that, hey, we want you to be in touch with the elder that's been assigned to you, because that elder becomes, when we talk about feedback channels, that elder is one of the best feedback channels you have, somebody who can know you, who cares about you. So we would like every member to experience that, and a number do, and we're still in the process of updating everybody to know who that elder is and to have that channel available to them. So, so thank you for that question. That's a great example.
Another question that was texted in, is there a plan to reinstate the First Impressions team or something similar to it? And you might have touched on it through the presentation, but if either of you would like to, maybe Josh, take that one.
Yeah, I can touch on it really briefly. Obviously, when you can't meet, that certainly impacts, your first impression. But now that, we're able to meet in person and have been for a little while, we've been working on some things behind the scenes just to recruit some additional people. We knew we wanted to breathe some more life. we as a church wanted to just breathe some more life and energy, just coming out of a season where we were just like really struggling for breath, it seemed like. But the First Impression team is one of those areas where it's such a cool opportunity and an easy opportunity for people to serve freely, just to be a welcoming presence, a smiling face on Sunday morning. So that's we're recruiting more people and trying to restructure the team and introducing that team alongside the hub that I talked about earlier, just so when you walk in on Sunday mornings, you really do feel a positive, warm first impression. If you're a first-time guest, man, that's what we want you to feel. And so the past few weeks, months, we've still been in the works, trying to recruit the people for the teams, bring those teams up to speed. So we're still in the process of that. But hopefully starting next Sunday, things will look different and feel very different. So I think the impression you get may not be your first, but it will be a good one.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Next question. Is there another question in the audience here that anybody would like to ask Mr. Frost?
I'm the young guy, so I got to run, I guess.
Good thing you're, them, okay, all right, very good. Well, first off, my hat's off to you guys. I spent 30 years working in very large organizations, sitting in some of these chairs trying to figure out what's going on. So I think the fact that you did the audit, persevered through that, and you've come up with some concrete steps, my hat's off to you. That's fantastic, so thank you. One of the things I saw up there, though, really took me back. It was the chart that was questioning how likely you are to ask a family member or a visitor to come to Wildwood. Over 60% of the respondents did not fall into the likely category. I saw that as a huge red flag as to why. Was there follow-up to that, or is there going to be follow-up to that?
Yeah, so I could take it. There were a number of reasons for that. So again, that question was intentionally open. So we didn't dial it in specific to communications. It was just Wildwood in general, what you've experienced, are you likely to recommend to friends and family? So there were a number of answers across the board. As you can imagine, some of it had to do with the pandemic, masks, and just generally the way things felt. And so I made that survey feedback available to other elders, other staff, just so everybody could take a look, because there were some things that weren't communications specific, but maybe it had to do with another area of our ministry. So that feedback is important, and we want to hear it. We want to listen and dial into those pain points. And when it comes to decisions, as you can imagine, anytime there's a decision made, you're going to have people who are very much in favor, and you're going to have people that are definitely not in favor. And so we had a lot of that. So there was a lot of, COVID in general just brought up a lot of polarization. And so the survey became kind of a receptacle, if you will, for a lot of that feedback. And some of it was, very constructive. And, even if it wasn't, what we wanted to hear, it was good to hear. So just know that even if it wasn't specific to communications, if it had to do with, any of our ministry areas, we wanted to bring that to the attention of the people responsible and who were influential in those areas. So there are some issues that we can't go back and redo, but as we move forward, knowing what we know, we want to do a much better job and do what we can, do what's appropriate to give people a reason to choose a higher recommendation score in the future.
Well, I wonder, Greg, if we did that same survey with that same question in December 2019, and if we did that same survey with the same question now, what kind of difference? That would be much more meaningful to me to see versus that snapshot in time back in February or March when things were not feeling so hot, not good at all. And so I think that would be something that we should follow up on and say that's not just, hey, it didn't pertain to communication, so we're going to disregard it. That could be a red flag. We don't know that it is yet, but it's definitely concerning enough to follow up, and one of our teams will follow up on that.
So the other piece of that now, as far as a practical next step, when we talk about feedback channels, so your elder being a living, breathing feedback channel. But one of the things that we also said we wanted to do is more of those surveys every once in a while after significant events or seasons where we can almost use that as a touch point to see, hey, are more people feeling better? Are they feeling like they're more likely to recommend now? So we want to be able to track that over time so that it's not so specific to a season that we all felt pretty terrible about. Moving forward, as things sort of return to more normalcy, familiarity, we want to continue to ask that question just to get a pulse every so often and see if we're moving in the right direction. And if we keep seeing some of the same things, then let's dial in a little bit more into those same things than we have.
Next question. This is a pretty good question. What is the goal of the communication plan? And I don't want to be just so simplistic to say we want to get better at communications. That doesn't say a lot. But more specifically, how will success be measured? Which is a great dovetail to that. And so do either of you want to take that second piece, how will success be measured on the communication plan?
Well, kind of tying back into the previous comment, you want measurable results. So it's one thing, to walk into a room and things feel better. And like you were saying about worship, there's something intangible and you can feel that things are getting better. But, part of those feedback surveys are meant to provide some measure of that, just to be able to, if we're asking the same thing consistently over time, you can begin to measure a little bit of success or, hopefully success. So that's part of it. And then, that's one of the things that we're asking these task forces to consider is, hey, as we're coming up with solutions, let's make sure that they're practical enough that we can gauge after a period of time if it's really working and to what degree is it working. So that's going to be important, just so that we don't say, hey, everything feels better. What can we specifically point to know that it's getting better? So that's going to be up to those task forces as well.
And that goes back to, this is not a program or something we're trying to roll out, a one-time thing. This is something we're trying to create a culture of. We're trying to create a culture of better communication between ministries, between officers, between staff members, and the congregation. So when you create a culture of something, it becomes part of your DNA. It's not necessarily a program. This was an interesting question that was texted in. How we set up these communications, and did we consult any subject matter experts in the congregation, and having that congregational input so the congregation feels invested. And David, why don't you take that one? You were just telling me about somebody in the communications field that might be good for one of the...
Yeah. But can you repeat it though? Did we consult anybody is what it said?
How we go about setting up these communications, and are there any subject matter experts in the congregation that could be consulted?
Yeah, so there's a member of our congregation right now that we've talked with. This is what they do for a living in here, and they've offered to help out with their expertise and et cetera. But again, these task forces are what we've had to set up for members of the congregation. Again, our mindset was, let's get represented from all the way across the church spectrum. And how do we get these folks to develop what are the practical solutions for us? So, yes, we have some folks in the congregation that will be keying in to help with that in the future. Some folks that this is what they do, for a living. So if that was a question.
Yeah, I think too, just one of the considerations when it came to the task force is we were trying to identify people that would have, a level of expertise, or their perspective would be more valuable in that specific area. Maybe it was because of their experience, maybe it's because of their occupation. So just know that we weren't just rolling dice and picking names out of a hat. We were specifically going after deacons, elders, staff, and then members of our congregation who we felt had a greater knowledge base and a greater expertise to contribute to that specific category.
This is a quick question, so I'll just hit this one before coming back to the room for another question. For transparency purposes, can dates and agendas of elder meetings be posted? I don't see why not. I don't think there's anything on the agenda, or the dates are usually we'll have a joint officer meeting the first Thursday of the month. That's elders and deacons meet together at 7 o'clock. We have dinner together first at 6:30. We meet at 7. We get our updates, ministry team reports, and then we break off into separate deacon and elder-led meetings after that. That's the first Thursday of the month. Then, usually the third Thursday of the month, we will have a separate session meeting early in the morning, typically 6:30 in the morning. And so that would be an elder-only meeting. But sometimes that changes, but typically that's how the routine goes. So that one's easy.
Yeah, the answer to that is, and Bob Bennett's in here, who's there. Those are available upon request, correct? Yeah, so any member can request that.
And dovetailing on that,
okay.
So the comment from Bob Bennett was that Brooke Jesse has a filing of all the minutes, and if anybody wants to know, also this was a separate question, year-to-date budget, year-to-date collections, year-to-date expenditures, those also are available upon request. It's not something we would put on the website necessarily, but again, that culture of communication, especially coming from the congregation, that's free information for you to have. That's not something that's hidden or behind the curtain at all. So,
yeah, and in terms of financials, we knew that was something specific that people had asked about, and so we are looking at ways to make that information to push it to our members especially. But just know that, yes, you can absolutely call, email, and ask for that information as well, but we are looking at ways to appropriately push that information so you have that.
And let's take one more question from in the room, and then we'll do one more text question. Anybody have a question in the room?
And I will say, too, for those that we don't answer tonight, we do want to kind of gather these questions and answer them, probably we'll call it offline, so that we can post those and you can have access to those. So even if we didn't get to your question this evening, we will make the effort to answer that and get that to you. A lot of the questions, I'm sure, were probably really similar or overlapped, but yeah, so is there anybody else? Like I said, it's a really exciting topic.
Well, this one just came in. How would you rate Darwin Box's goatee on a scale of 1 to 10? I'd give it a 10. I'd give it a 10.
But are they asking the audience? Like,
There's 10. Marnie Frost says 10. Okay, on a serious note, this question, talking about communication across the board in different ministry areas, like student ministries to parents. Could you speak just for a brief minute on ministry teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the things that we wanted to develop. What are the common ways that we want to communicate across the board? And so we looked, and one of the things that we learned in this, not just the audit, but one of the things we learned just over the last year and a half is one of the places in our church that is extraordinarily effective. Keep in mind what we put up there, what is effective communication is. Do with simplicity, clarity, and then consistency. Ministry is very effective at communication. It became very clear. Kristen Matherly and the whole team over there within the kids ministry is very effective at communication. They do a fantastic job. And so we said, are there some things that they are doing that the rest of us can learn from and mimic? And the answer to that is yes. There are some things that we want to do that will develop consistency. And Josh has been working with the student ministry teams as well as some other teams in there so that we can develop what are the best practices so that you as a member of the congregation, no matter where you are, no matter what area of ministry you're serving in or being a part of, you can expect these things. Within communicating, in other words, you expect these things to happen. So just as an example, Josh and I talk about one of the things you've been working on right now. What is the timeline when you have a major event? So when there's a major event in the church that is not a weekly event, but it's a major event we have, what's the timeline that says you're going to hear about it this many weeks out? And then this many weeks out is when we have sign up and registration, and then registration closes at this date. We want to have that consistent all the way throughout the church. So whether it's a men's retreat or a women's retreat or it's whatever it is. And that is a part of what these task forces will be doing, determining, as well as what we just have ministry teams that some people are being a part of that are working with individual ministries within the church. So yeah, we think there's some good things that are about to come about. And the timeline on that, you think all these task forces, what was the timeline we said we think they'll all be done by this date?
Yeah, I mean, so we didn't have a specific timeline for each one because some of the areas will probably take a little bit longer to explore than others. But certainly the goal was to really move into the fall with renewed momentum, with enough having been implemented, some change for the better having been implemented, that people could feel and see just a difference in Wildwood Church as we move back into the fall, as more ministries restart their regular programming, more people are meeting together. So that was kind of the goal moving into the fall, just to have some momentum to take us there. And then one of the things that I've said too, just as it pertains to all the ministries, I mentioned this to the staff and to the officers, but I said communication for me is it's kind of the tide that raises all ships. So if all of your ministries are communicating effectively and all your ministries are accountable to the same systems, everyone, no matter what ministry you're in, you're going to feel the health of that. And I think that's one of the, we were talking about kids ministry just doing a fantastic job. I mean, the fact that, when we're asking for open-ended feedback about, why are you likely to recommend, why are you satisfied at Wildwood, and the fact that kids ministry was, up there near the top. I mean, that's a testament to if you can clearly communicate, if you can make parents and families feel like they're in the loop, it just affects the way that they perceive the entire church. And so that's something that we're looking to implement just across the board. And obviously, with our student ministry, Mark is he kind of jumped into the swing of things in one of the most active seasons of the year for student ministry. So I've been working with him just to bring him alongside what those systems need to be. So what we're trying to do is not have one system for this ministry and one for this ministry. We really want everybody to be on the same system, and we think that's going to improve accountability just across the board. It's going to improve trust across the board, and again, Wildwood is just going to feel different if all of those things are in place. So it may not happen right away, but again, bear with us. I would hope that you would fill that gap with some trust as we get better, as the rest of the staff gets better and implements that system. So I see some good things on the horizon, especially moving in the fall.
Well, and with that healthy communication, consistency was one of those root words. We've had some staff turnover. We've had some systems turnover. So I got, just personally, I got used to giving through the CCB website while we were gone. Now, we do have a better system in place than CCB, but doggone it, I got used to doing it one way, and I didn't like it that they took my cheese away. So I had to learn a new system, and that's not always fun or easy, but some of those things will change, staffing will change, and we want to make sure that culture that we all have of better communication feeds through into all different areas, regardless of change. Change is going to happen in many different areas, and so managing through change and resting on some of these systems of communication that we're trying to put into place, these train tracks, as Josh likes to call it, hopefully will help with the health there. What do you guys think? Do we have time for one more from the audience, or sure. We're going to break at 6:15? Is that when we're going, or are we already over?
Is there another question? I knew there'd be one.
So my question is, when we came back here 14 years ago, we got like a booklet in this fall, and so you could like salivate over which class you were going to take, and what you were going to be involved in, and just so I was wondering what the school thought was how we went from that to like nothing, because they say 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and so I just feel like. Or wonder, if people don't know about volunteer opportunities, or it's hard to find them, or even like, I asked Mom, I'm like, I'm going to the Sunday school class, are you coming? She's like, I'm going to this one. I'm like, oh, there's two? So, it's just wondering the school of thought, how we went from so much information to which it feels like it was like zero on what's available, if that makes sense.
All right, so I think so it's your question is more specific to just the information about the opportunities, less so about like the format of the opportunities. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, so yeah, that specifically, that is one thing out of the audit that we knew we needed to do more of, is communicating the opportunities that are available, because one of the things we're susceptible in, the behind the scenes of church world is we may be privy to that information and just forget that you're not. And so I think part of the goal with the vision celebration is there's going to be something that comes out of that is specifically designed to put our church family in touch with the opportunities and to lay down a path to getting involved and presenting those opportunities. So, information has been hit and miss. That's been the struggle. It's been inconsistent. So part of the system is, moving towards something consistent, whether that's an event that you can look forward to with those those opportunities are going to be readily available. If it's a resource that's put in your hands, we know we need to get more of our church involved in the life of our church, and that's more important now than it ever has been. So I think you can look forward to some of the things coming out of the vision celebration that are going to be moving in that direction. And so we've got some other staff specifically working on documenting those opportunities and trying to figure out, okay, how do we immediately get people involved in them? So I appreciate the question, because that is tapping into one of those nerves that people have felt for a long time. So I think the benefit of that vision celebration is it will be motivating, it'll be inspiring, you're going to want to get involved, so then we're going to want to get you involved as soon as possible.
And just a quick word on anybody that sent in a question that we maybe didn't get to. There's one about church directory. We will respond and follow up to that one to you personally. And I wanted to say a special thank you to Catherine for filtering all the questions in and getting them up to the iPad. So great job, Catherine. Thank you.
All right. David, do you want to, since you are the pastor on stage, do you want to pray?
I also felt like I was the one that talked the least. It was kind of nice. It's great to have folks that knew what was going on. Let me just say this one last thing, and I'm going to pray. I want you to hear this. To answer your question there, ultimately, why did we change? I think we just got lazy. Now, that's just me talking. That's without, expert input. I think we got lazy in terms of the way that we make some things available to it. I think it was unintentional, but because it was not intentional, we got lazy and let some things go. So I want you to hear this. Many of you have been around Wildwood a long time say, yep, I know. Listen, we start something, we say we're going to die, I get it, yep. All I can tell you is this, with every fiber of my being, the system that we are developing now is not a system that will allow us to get away with just being lazy. And I think we are creating a system now that allows the desire to become effective at communication, impact a commitment, but then also the plans may change over time. But the system that we're creating right now is one that will not allow us to quit and to give up on it. And so I'm excited about where we're headed in there. All right. Love you guys. Thank you so much for being in person, for joining online or watching this 8 days later, whenever it is that you're watching it. So I'm going to pray. Father, thank you again for the fact we say this a lot, but we really believe it. We know that you love Wildwood more than we do. And we know that you have been actively involved in moving and stirring. And Lord, thank you for your promise that you have given to us, where you told us the work that you began, you will bring to completion. And so you will continue all the way until the return of Christ. So thank you for your commitment to not give up on us. I pray that we would, in the same kind of way, be able to make that same commitment, empowered by you, guaranteed by you, and that we also would never quit. So thanks for communication. It's your idea. We're asking that you would help us to use our brains, to use collective thinking, to develop good plans and systems. But ultimately, Lord, we're asking that you would do the work in us and amongst us. Help us, Lord, to see you, to celebrate you, to believe in you, to trust in you. Just thanks. You're great. We love you, and we pray all of this not because we've lived really good lives this week and feel like we've earned the right to pray. Now, we pray it solely because Jesus has done everything that is necessary. And so it's in his name that we present all these requests to you. Amen.